What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, yesterday, the Detroit Lions did make their final roster cuts as they slimmed the roster from 80 men down to 53 men. And in typical Detroit Lions fashion, there is going to be some controversy with the cuts. And today, I'm going to be going every single player that was cut from the Detroit Lions last night and talk about, some of the surprising cuts, some of the more easy cuts to see, and why the Detroit Lions made the decisions that they did, in my opinion. So before we do get into the video, though, if you are new to the channel and are enjoying the content, consider liking the videos and subscribing to the channel. This takes only 2 seconds out of your day and it helps me push this content out to more Detroit Lions fans such as yourselves. It would help the channel out and I'd be super appreciative for it. But with all that being said, let's get into talking about these roster cuts and why the Detroit Lions might have made the decisions that they did. Now, as I said, the Detroit Lions obviously had some controversy. It seems like every year the Detroit Lions have some of these players that the fans are excited about, the media's hyping up, the Lions seem very happy with, and then the roster cut day comes and the Detroit Lions just cut them anyway, and they're like, haha, got them. And they just like pranking the Detroit Lions fans, I guess, because every year it seems like we have these guys that the fans are in love with, the media's in love with, the Lions are in love with, and they just get cut anyways, and it doesn't seem to matter. So, I don't know, dude, the perks of being a Lions fan, I guess. But on a serious note, getting into these roster cuts, we're going to start at the quarterback and go all the way down. So the only quarterback to be cut was David Blau, the third string quarterback that stepped in last year and played 5 games for the Detroit Lions. Now, a lot of people thought David Blau was going to make the team. This was one of those surprising cuts that I was talking about just a minute ago. The fans liked him, the media likes him, the Detroit Lions seem to like him. They traded for him last offseason, and for some reason they just decided to let him go. David Blau is a very talented quarterback, an undrafted free agent out of the University of Purdue. I do think he will end up on the Detroit Lions practice squad, and I do believe that he will be one of the 4 protected players on the Detroit Lions practice squad. If you do not know, this year the Detroit Lions, or if you did not know, this year NFL teams are allowed to have 16 players on their practice squad, and they are allowed to protect 4. So those 4 players that they protect cannot be stolen, cannot be signed away to other NFL teams. So I think David Blau will be one of those guys, and I actually think it was a smart decision to put him on the practice squad if he does end up there, because David Blau, it's a third string quarterback, so if we need him, we can always pull him up from the practice squad. But why carry 3 quarterbacks if Matthew Stafford and Chase Daniel are going to be healthy the whole season and we don't need David Blau? Why waste that roster spot when we could have another roster spot open for a guy like Mike Ford, for a guy like Jamal Agnew, who, if they didn't open up that roster spot, if they didn't get rid of David Blau and we kept their quarterbacks, one of those guys might not have made the roster. So I think it was actually smart to cut David Blau, and if he does end up on the practice squad and is protected, then obviously he's still a member of the Detroit Lions organization. Obviously it shows the Detroit Lions still like this guy and they're going to keep him around for the future. But I know a lot of people were confused about this, but if they do end up putting him on the practice squad, I do actually think it was a smart move by the Detroit Lions. Moving on to the running back room, we have 2 really easy ones to see, 2 guys that weren't going to make the team, and then we have one very big surprise. The Detroit Lions yesterday cut Wes Hillis, Jonathan Williams, and Jason Huntley from the roster. Now, Wes Hillis and Jason Huntley were 2 guys that I thought were going to get cut in the first place. I just thought they were camp bodies. They were brought in because Kerryon Johnson, DeAndre Swift, Bo Scarborough were all dealing with injuries. I think they were just brought in to be those camp bodies to take some snaps, and if they impressed, good, you found a diamond in the rough, but if not, then we just cut him, we move on. Kerryon and DeAndre Swift and Bo Scarborough are healthy, ready to go for the season, and they don't have these lingering injuries because they were forced to do extra reps in training camp. However, Jason Huntley was the big surprise, as Jason Huntley was our 5th round pick, and every single person in the Detroit Lions community thought this guy was going to be a big part of the offense. Everybody in the Detroit Lions community thought this was going to be our gadget player, this was going to be our J.D. McKissick, this was going to be our big play home run hitter, this was going to be the guy that transforms the offense and how Darrell Bevell calls the plays. However, Jason Huntley was released yesterday by the Detroit Lions. Now, I couldn't tell you why. Honestly, I have a theory about it, and if you want to hear my theory, go over to the Adrian Peterson video that I released just a little while ago, and you can hear my theory on that. But, honestly, at the end of the day, I have no idea what the Detroit Lions are thinking here. Again, I think just like David Blau, Jason Huntley is going to be one of those guys that is protected. I think Jason Huntley is going to remain a member of the Detroit Lions roster, but they're just want him to develop a little bit more. So I think that they're just putting him on the practice squad, letting him practice with the Detroit Lions. They could always pull him up throughout the season if he does end up on the practice squad, but I do think he will end up being one of those protected players. Then we move on to the wide receivers. The Detroit Lions cut 4 wide receivers this year in Chris Lacey, Tom Kennedy, Victor Bolden, and Jeremy Davis. Now, no surprises really here. The big six were filled out with Kenny, Marvin Jones, Marvin Hall, Danny Amendola, Quintez Cephas, and Jamal Agnew. There wasn't really a spot for any of those 4 guys on the roster, so there aren't a whole lot of surprises there. At tight end, this was a controversial one as well, as Matt Sokol was released. That was pretty easy. However, Isaac Nauta was also released. Now, I predicted this. I thought Isaac Nauta would be released. I just thought that Hunter Bryant's athleticism and his potential was too big to pass up on. I didn't think it was worth the risk of putting him on the, I didn't think it was a risk. I didn't think the risk was worth taking of putting him on the practice squad and potentially having him being stolen. So I feel like, in my opinion, the Detroit Lions left Hunter Bryant on the active roster. He is injured, right now, and whether that injury is severe or not doesn't necessarily matter, because if he's not that injured and he can play, then he's going to be a huge asset to this pass offense. And if he is too injured to play, the Detroit Lions can put him on IR, have him on the roster safe, and then pull up Isaac Nauta anyway to be that tight end 3. So I do think the Detroit Lions have a plan there. I don't think they're just giving up on Isaac Nauta quite yet. I believe he will be the 3rd player that is protected under the practice squad's new rules. So those are the top 3 that I think will be protected in Blau, Huntley, and Nauta. I think those are the first 3 that will be protected. And then Matt Sokol, in my opinion, just never really had a chance to beat out Hawkinson, Jesse James, Hunter Bryant, or Isaac Nauta. So that one wasn't a big surprise to me. Moving on to the offensive line, the Detroit Lions did cut 3 offensive linemen, and these were guys that were very much in contention for starting roles and very key roles for the Detroit Lions offense. Now, the 3 guys that they did end up cutting were Kenny Wiggins, Oday Abushi, and Bo Ben Schwazel. Now, Bo was probably the biggest surprise here, as he was supposed to be the backup center. Now, what that tells me is that I think Bo will end up on the practice squad. I think Kenny Wiggins and Oday Abushi will hit free agency. I don't think the Detroit Lions are going to put them on the practice squad, but Bo, the Detroit Lions have brought out of undrafted free agency a few years ago. They've kept him on the active roster for a couple years now, and the reason they're letting him go must be because Logan Stenberg impressed enough in training camp at that backup center position to warrant the Detroit Lions moving on from Bo. Now, will Bo end up on the practice squad? Probably, because the Detroit Lions obviously liked him enough out of Wisconsin to keep him for 2 years out of undrafted free agency on the active roster. So obviously the Detroit Lions like him a lot, but I do think that Logan Stenberg must have just been playing well enough for the Detroit Lions to say, all right, well, we're willing to risk Bo being taken from our roster because we have faith in Logan Stenberg, or we have confidence in Logan Stenberg that if Frank Ragnow does go down, he can step up and play better than Bo was playing in the past. So obviously Bo was a surprise one, but again, there wasn't anything super controversial on the O-line. Now, moving on to the defensive line, most of these were pretty easy to see coming. However, there was one that, was not necessarily a surprise because I had the Detroit Lions cutting them also, but this is a guy that I think will take the 4th protected spot on the practice squad. Now, the defensive linemen that were cut were Will Clark, Frank Herron, Albert Huggins, Olive Sagapolu, Kevin Wilkins, and Kevin Strong. Now, I believe Kevin Strong will be the 4th player to be protected on the practice squad. I think the Detroit Lions love Kevin Strong. He was an undrafted free agent last season and ended up making the active roster. He was a big part of the defense last year, stepped up in key roles at points last season when injuries started to pile up. And I like Kevin Strong. I thought he was a good player for the Detroit Lions last year. I was not surprised that the Detroit Lions cut him, but he was one of those last guys that I was like, okay, the Detroit Lions are probably going to cut him, but this is a guy that I want the Detroit Lions to keep around because I think Kevin Strong stepped up big last year. I think he performed pretty well for being an undrafted free agent thrown into a role in the NFL, and I think the Detroit Lions really like this guy. They're going to keep him around as long as they can, and Kevin Strong is going to be the 4th player to be protected on the practice squad. He was the only one that was controversial during the releases. The other 4 guys were just kind of brought in as camp bodies, in my opinion. They were just brought in to compete with the 3rd string guys. And, again, kind of like the running backs, if they perform really well, if they exceed expectations, they start balling out. Great, you found a diamond in the rough, but if not, it's not a big deal. You just cut them and you move on with the guys that you expected to have anyways. So from that standpoint, not a whole lot of surprise there. And then we move on to the linebackers. Only one linebacker was cut, and I think that's more of a surprise than who it actually was. Now, Anthony Pittman was the linebacker that was cut. However, the Detroit Lions are holding on to a lot of linebackers here. They loaded up on linebackers as I think they held 6 or 7 linebackers on the roster. They held a lot of guys this year, and that makes sense because Matt Patricia doesn't carry a lot of defensive linemen on the field. Most of the time, the Detroit Lions only have 3 to 4 offensive linemen or defensive linemen on the field at a time, and they have a lot more linebackers in secondary. So the Detroit Lions loaded up there. They only released one linebacker linebacker in Anthony Pittman. I didn't think Anthony Pittman really had an opportunity to make the active roster. I think not necessarily a camp body because he was there to compete. He played a little bit last season, but at the end of the day, he wasn't going to beat out Jamie Collins, Jared Davis, Jelani Tavai, even Chris Jones. He wasn't going to beat out any of those guys, and he didn't even beat out Elijah Lee, who did actually end up making the roster, which was surprising to me. So, Anthony Pittman was cut. He'll be back probably next preseason, next offseason to compete for a roster spot yet again. And then we move on to the secondary. Now, there were 3 secondary players cut, and none of them were really surprises at the beginning. However, one of them seemed for a long time like he was going to make the active roster, and then at the end of the roster cuts, all of a sudden Jalen Elliott's name showed up. Now, the 3 secondary players that were cut were D. Virgin, Bobby Price, and Jalen Elliott. Now, Jalen Elliott and Bobby Price, in my opinion, are going to end up on the practice squad as they are very young and very talented rookies. Jalen Elliott seemed for a while there that he was going to make the active roster. He was tweeting out stuff. He was putting stuff on social media that made it seem like he did actually make the active roster. And then he ended up being one of the final players that was cut from the Detroit Lions. Now, again, I think both of them are going to end up on the practice squad. They can't be saved because I already, told you who I think are going to be the 4 protected players. However, if those 2 do not get signed, they will be in contention. If a safety gets hurt, if somebody goes down with an injury, they're going to be the first 2 that the Lions look to pull up to the active roster, especially if somebody in the secondary gets hurt, because they are very talented young safeties. They are very talented, and I believe that they are going to compete for a roster spot for a couple years to come. It just so happens that this year the Detroit Lions, safeties were better than Jalen Elliott. They were better than Bobby Price, and they did not end up making the active roster, but I think those 2 are great candidates for the practice squad as well. D. Virgin got beat out by Tony McRae. I saw this coming for a little bit now. I had us cutting him in my cut predictions, and, I just feel like Tony McRae outplayed D. Virgin in training camp. So, best of luck to D. Virgin on his next team. And then we cut the long snapper in Steven Wirtel. Not a whole lot to talk about here either. Just, Don Muhlbach doing Don Muhlbach things, just winning the long snapper job for like the 100th year in a row. So, he's going to be the long snapper for another year in Detroit. But those were our roster cuts. As I said, there were a couple really controversial ones in there in David Blau, Jason Huntley, Kevin Strong, and even Isaac Nauta. Those were the big 4 that people were like, wow, I can't believe the Detroit Lions actually went through with cutting these guys. These were guys that, David Blau was supposed to be, some people think he's the future quarterback. Jason Huntley, as I talked about, is supposed to be that X factor. Isaac Nauta was talked about moving to fullback and maybe even being the number 3 tight end. Kevin Strong, as I mentioned, was a guy that a lot of people stepped up in the season last year. There were some controversial cuts this year, just like every season for the Detroit Lions. But a lot of these guys are going to make the practice squad. A couple of these guys are going to be, saved to the Detroit Lions roster. A lot of them, or 4 of them, are not going to be able to be taken from the Detroit Lions roster. And honestly, yeah, it's unfortunate that some of these guys got cut, but I think it's too early to freak out. It's too early to say that Jason Huntley was a wasted pick. It's too early to say David Blau is not the future quarterback. It's too early to say that we gave up on Isaac Nauta too early, because I don't think we're giving up on these players. I think we're just putting them on the practice squad, giving them time to practice and develop, and giving them more time to just become better NFL players. And I don't see us, releasing some of these players. Yes, we are giving up on them. Some of these players we are just cutting because they weren't quite good enough to make the roster. But a lot of these players, a lot of these young guys that were surprise cuts, we're not giving up on these guys. We're giving them more time to develop. We're giving them more time to become better football players. And at the end of the day, I think it's going to be better for these young players to develop. And we're not going to have to throw them into game situations right away. They're going to have time to develop. They're going to have time to, work in training camps. They're going to have time to work in practices with NFL talent, with the Detroit Lions roster. And, come a few years down the road, Jason Huntley is going to be on the active roster. David Blau is going to be on the active roster. Isaac Nauta is going to be on the active roster. Kevin Strong is going to be on the active roster. I guarantee it. And, I understand people are frustrated, but I think it's too early to say we gave up on these players just yet. You got to give the Detroit Lions a chance to prove that they know what they're doing, because, this roster was a very strong one. And just because some players got cut doesn't mean that their time in Detroit is over quite yet. Now, with all that being said, that is all I got for you guys today. I wanted to go over the roster cuts, kind of give you my opinion, kind of talk about the roster a little bit. And I believe this roster is very talented. The fact that we had to cut some very talented players tells me that this roster is, very competitive, very tough, and it is going to be a tough one to take down for any NFL team this season. So I'm excited to see how this roster forms and how this roster shapes out throughout the 2020 season. But with all that being said, that is all I got for you guys today. Hope you guys enjoyed the video and have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. If there is more Lions news before tomorrow, I will obviously make a video letting every single person know. But until then, that is all I got for you guys right now. Hope you guys enjoyed the video and have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. If there is no Lions news, I will see all of you tomorrow with more Detroit Lions content. But until then, bye guys.
Bye.